A flickering light exposes a deadly secret. Welcome to Wolfe's Casebook. I am your host, Enigma. Share where you're tuning in from. I love seeing your comments. Let's step into the case. If you want to know how a case gets into Nero Wolfe's lap, you could do worse than to watch a fly land on his beer. There's always a moment when you can see the big man decide whether to swat, ignore, or arrange the whole room so the fly winds up in a bottle, confessed and labeled before dinner. Me, I get the front row seat because I live in the brownstone, earn my keep by keeping other people out of it, and narrate our invasions in a way that helps the rent. That last part is a joke, because Wolfe owns the building, the orchids, and the opinions. And if there was a mortgage, he'd order Fritz to pay it, with bechamel. It was a Tuesday that wore its November like a damp overcoat. Not cold enough to freeze anything important, not warm enough to make you forgive New York for existing. The kind of day when the air is the color of used dishwater and even the pigeons look like they're billing you by the hour. I'd just gotten back from doing something Wolfe calls an excursion, and I call keeping the world from ending while he sits there. There was the red leather chair in the office, the only piece of furniture in the city with a permanent indentation shaped like an emperor. Wolfe was installed in it now, huge, serene, and as mobile as a courthouse. The beer was beside him, sweating on the desk blotter like it had a conscience. The orchids were above us, because that's where the good things in Wolfe's life belong. High, controlled, and not in my way. He didn't look up when I came in. "Good morning," I said, because that's my little rebellion. Remind him time passes even if he doesn't. "It is afternoon," he rumbled, in the tone a cathedral might use to correct a mouse. I hung up my coat, which had been trying to drown me on the walk home. "Then good afternoon. I saw a man on 9th Avenue trying to sell umbrellas from a box marked ornamental fish. That should tell you where civilization stands." "Box," Wolfe said. "Not at me. At the universe." "Fish." He picked up the beer, studied it as if expecting it to argue back, and took a sip. I was about to ease into my desk and pretend I had a stack of important things to do when the doorbell rang. Not the discreet little chime for deliveries, but the front bell, the one that in Wolfe's mind is reserved for 3 categories: clients with money, policemen with warrants, and lunatics who got our address from a fortune cookie. The bell rang again, impatient this time, and I looked at Wolfe. He looked at me. We communicated. He does it with eyelids. I do it with a sigh. I went out through the hall, past the stairs that are the first test in any visitor's fitness to disturb Wolfe's peace, and opened the front door. The woman on the stoop wasn't a lunatic. She had too much control in her face for that. Control and a kind of expensive fatigue, the way a diamond looks when it's been in a drawer too long. Mid-30s maybe, hair pinned tight enough to keep secrets, coat plain but like it had been tailored by someone who never said plain in her life. She had a small black hat that made her look as if she'd stepped out of a photograph that had decided to come alive and file a lawsuit. She didn't ask if this was Nero Wolfe's address. People who ring that bell twice don't ask questions they already know the answer to. "Mr. Goodwin," she said. Her voice was steady but not relaxed. A violin string before the bow hits it. "It depends who's asking." She blinked once. "My name is Clara Vane." I waited. The name didn't hit any bells in my head. "That's not a complaint. My head is already crowded." "I need to see Mr. Wolfe," she said. "At once." "I'll check if he's taking visitors. Any reason he should break his schedule for you?" She studied me carefully, like she was trying to decide whether I was an obstacle or an ally. Because if he doesn't, a man will go to prison for something he didn't do, and another man will remain free to do it again. That was a line delivered too cleanly to be rehearsed. If she was acting, she was the kind that doesn't get caught running. "Come in," I said. She stepped inside without looking around. That told me 2 things. She wasn't here to admire architecture, and she'd already imagined this hallway many times. People who need Wolfe tend to rehearse the brownstone in their minds before they cross the threshold. I took her up the stairs. She climbed without panting, which never hurts your case with Wolfe, though he pretends it doesn't matter. At the office door, I paused. "Before I unleash you in there," I said, "I should mention a few house rules. Mr. Wolfe doesn't like to be rushed. He doesn't like to be lied to, and he doesn't like to be asked to do something for nothing." "I'm not here to rush him," she said. "I'm here because he's the only person who might believe me." That snagged my sleeve for a second. People don't say "believe me" unless their story is going to sound crazy or make someone else sound respectable. Sometimes both. I opened the door. Wolfe did look up this time. He has a way of taking in a visitor with one heavy glance and then deciding which drawer to put them in. He didn't invite her to sit. That's another rule. You don't get a chair until he's decided you're not a waste of oxygen. Clara Vane didn't wait for permission. She crossed to the yellow chair opposite his desk and sat with her back straight. If Wolfe noticed the breach, it didn't show. Wolfe respects audacity the way a lion respects fire. "Mr. Wolfe," she said. "Madam," he replied. "Mr. Goodwin informs me your name is Vane. That is not information. Why are you here?" She hesitated. Not the flustered kind, but the tactical kind, like a fencer choosing a blade. "I'm here about a death," she said. "But it's not only a death." Wolfe's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Continue." "A man named Julian Harrow was arrested last night for the murder of my brother, Daniel Vane." The name Harrow didn't ring any bells either. I made a mental note to have a bell inventory later. "Your brother was murdered," Wolfe said. He made it sound like something that happens when you undercook poultry. "Yes, on Riverside Drive, near 94th Street, under a street lamp." Her eyes flicked once to me, then back to Wolfe. She was watching for reactions, which meant she knew this part of the story had hooks in it. "Continue," Wolfe said again, because he doesn't waste syllables on niceties. The street lamp flickered. It went out for a moment. When it came back on, my brother was on the pavement. Someone called it in. The police arrived. There was a man standing there, shaken, blood on his sleeve. "Julian Harrow. He was arrested. They say he had a knife. They say he confessed." Wolfe didn't move. He let her words hang where he could inspect their shape. "And you believe Mr. Harrow is innocent?" he said at length. "I know he is." Her voice tightened on the word "no." Someone who says that either has proof or is too terrified to admit she doesn't. Wolfe leaned back a fraction. It wasn't relaxation, it was recalibration. "You were present?" "No." "Then you do not know." She opened her handbag with controlled hands and brought out a folded paper. Not a wad, not a scrap. Folded cleanly. She slid it across the desk. Wolfe looked at it as if it were a beetle. "Mr. Goodwin, I took it because I have the advantage of being able to pick things up without anyone calling a doctor. It was a small sheet torn from a notebook, ruled. There was writing in ink, neat but hurried. Clara, if anything happens to me, it wasn't Julian. Trust no one in the circle. The street lamp will tell you. Daniel. I read it twice, because a note like that is a cheap trick unless it's real. And if it's real, it's a loaded gun. I gave it to Wolfe. He read it once, slowly. His face did not change. His face doesn't change for explosions either. Circle, he said softly. Street lamp, tell you. That's his handwriting, Clara said. I've seen it all my life. He wrote that 2 days ago. Why did he write it? Wolfe asked. Because he was scared, and because he was right to be. Wolfe held the note between thumb and forefinger, as if he were about to smell it. Why did he fear? Who is in this circle? She drew a breath. Daniel was a columnist. He wrote about municipal contracts, the kind that end up costing the city twice what they should. He had a source, someone inside. 3 weeks ago, he told me he'd found something big. Bigger than the banks, he said. Bigger than the unions. Bigger than the mayor's haircut. I'd met the mayor's haircut once. Daniel didn't sound like a man who exaggerated lightly. He said there was a group, she went on, a network, people who arranged bids, people who protected each other. He called them a circle because, he said, they never let anyone fall out unless they wanted them dead. Wolfe's eyes were steady on her. Names. I don't have them all. He wouldn't tell me, for my own safety. A grim smile flickered. I suppose that worked out beautifully, but I know a few. People he mentioned, people who had reason to hate him. She reached in her bag again, and this time produced a small address book. Not fashionable, more like a tool someone used every day. She opened it to a page with a ribbon and read from it carefully, like invoking devils. There's Victor Ralling, she said. Deputy Commissioner for Public Works. Daniel called him the hinge on the door. Go on. Marina Holt. She's a real estate developer. She was suing the city, and Daniel wrote about her connections to Ralling's office. Continue. Ezra Tapp, a consultant. He used to work for the procurement board, and now he advises companies on how to win bids. Wolfe's lips pressed together. I could tell he was building scaffolding in his head. And there's one more, she said, and her face hardened. My brother's editor, Simon Frobisher. At that, something in Wolfe's expression changed. Not surprise, but attention, like a chess player who's just seen a queen move into range. You are acquainted with Mr. Frobisher? With his ambition, yes. Wolfe turned slightly in his chair, which in his world counts as a lunge. These are your suspects, then. 4 individuals, each with motive. But motive is not evidence. I'm not asking you to convict them, she snapped, then reined it in. I'm asking you to stop Julian Harrow from being crushed to save their skins. And who is Mr. Harrow to you? Wolfe asked. She looked at him straight. My brother's friend, She paused, not for drama, but because words were suddenly sharp. My fiancé. Ah, there it was. The reason she was here instead of letting the police do their noisy little dance. If your lover is in the cage, you don't wait for the zookeeper to decide if it was a mistake. Wolfe took another sip of beer. He set the glass down with care. Madam, he said, you ask much. You bring a note of uncertain probity and a roster of respectable citizens. The police have a confession. It was forced, she said. They kept him in a room for 10 hours. He didn't have a lawyer. That is circumstances, Wolfe said. Not proof. She leaned forward. Then let me give you proof. Daniel told me something else. The night before he died, he met someone, his source. He didn't say who. But he said, if I disappear, follow the flicker. I didn't understand. I still don't, but I think it has to do with that street lamp. The street lamp will tell you, I murmured, mostly to myself. Wolfe heard it. He usually does. He looked back at Clara Vane. What precisely do you want me to do? I want you to take the case. Find who killed Daniel. Prove Julian didn't, and if the people in that circle are guilty, I want them exposed, not by headlines, by facts. Wolfe's gaze drifted, not away from her, but into the middle distance where he keeps the gears. He was silent long enough that I could hear the radiator deciding to live another winter. Finally, he spoke. The fee. She had expected that. She slid a second paper onto the desk, a check. I won't mention the amount because I don't want to sound like a food critic describing truffles, but it was the kind of number that makes you sit straighter even if you're already sitting. Wolfe glanced at it and then at her. That is adequate for initiation. It may not be adequate for completion. I have more, she said quickly. My brother left me enough to pay for any help that can save Julian. Wolfe nodded once. That is as close as he comes to a handshake. Very well, he said. I will consider myself engaged. Mr. Goodwin will proceed to gather facts. You will remain available. You will tell Mr. Goodwin everything you know, including what you may think unimportant. If you deceive me, the engagement is null. I won't deceive you. Do not promise, Wolfe said. Perform. She stood. For the first time, her composure showed a crack, a tiny tremor in her hand as she adjusted her gloves. She wasn't made of steel after all. She was a woman who'd just pushed the heaviest door she knew. At the threshold, she turned back. Mr. Wolfe, why did you say you would consider yourself engaged? Are you still doubtful? Wolfe looked at her steadily. I'm always doubtful. It is a habit that has served me. She nodded, as if that was the only sensible answer in the city, and left with me to the hall. I walked her down. At the door she paused again. You believe me? She asked, softly now. I gave her what I could. I believe you believe it. That's step one around here. She almost smiled. Thank you. Then she was gone into the grey day, and the front door clicked shut behind her, leaving the brownstone with that brief echo of other people's trouble. I went back upstairs to the office. Wolfe was still in the chair. The note lay on his desk like a dare. Well, I said, dropping into my own chair. We've got a flickering street lamp, a dead columnist, a fiancé in the tombs, and 4 respectable suspects. Smells like politics with a side of murder. Wolfe's eyes were half-lidded. Smells like a woman who is frightened and resolute. That combination often produces accuracy. Or disasters. Disasters, too. Mr. Goodwin, he said. And now there was iron under the velvet. We will begin with the street lamp. A lamp that flickers at the moment of death is either coincidence or contrivance. I do not indulge coincidence. Meaning? Meaning you will go to Riverside Drive. You will observe. You will inquire. You will speak with the police if they will speak with you, and with anyone else who may have seen or heard. The lamp is an object. Objects do not lie, but they are often used by those who do. I grinned. Legwork, my favorite hobby. Anything else? Yes. You will locate Mr. Frobisher, also Mr. Ralling, Miss Holt, and Mr. Tapp. You will learn their movements last night, their relations to Daniel Vane, and their relations to each other. You will bring me facts. You'll sit right there and turn them into fireworks. He raised an eyebrow. Do not be flippant. I'm never flippant about fireworks. He looked at the note again. There is another matter. The phrase, trust no one in the circle, implies internal treachery. It is possible the circle is not merely a metaphor. It may be a formal association. Like a club with bad manners. Or power, we shall see. I stood, feeling the gears engage in my own chest. A case in the brownstone is like a new orchestra tuning up. You don't know what symphony you're getting, but you can already hear there'll be brass. Okay, I said. I'll start with the lamp. If it confesses, I'll bring it home in a sack. Mr. Goodwin. Yeah. Be careful. A street lamp that flickers may be a signal, and signals are addressed to someone. I paused. Wolfe doesn't do melodrama. If he warns you, it's because he sees the cliff while you're still admiring the view. Got it, I said. I took my coat, my hat, and my optimism out into the stairwell. Behind me, the office settled back into its sacred quiet, with Nero Wolfe already turning a dead man's last sentence into a map. Ahead of me was Riverside Drive and a lamp that had blinked at the wrong moment. Somewhere in between was the person who'd made it blink. I took a taxi up to Riverside Drive because when Wolfe tells you to start with a street lamp, you don't argue about transportation. The cab smelled like yesterday's cigar and tomorrow's despair, which is standard for Manhattan. And the driver talked about a cousin who'd invested in something called coin trading that promised 100% weekly. I said, in the tone that means I'm filing it in the same drawer as perpetual motion machines and honest aldermen. Riverside, near 94th, was a strip of river air and wet pavement, the kind of place where the city pretends it's a civilized promenade while quietly arranging accidents. The sky was low and slate-colored. The lamp was there, mounted on a black iron pole, respectable as a sentry. Nothing about it said I flicker for murder, but nothing about a revolver says it either until somebody pulls the trigger. I stood under it, looking up like a tourist. The glass globe was clean enough to show it got attention. The pole had a small city tag with a number and another sticker that said LED Retrofit 2023. That last bit was useful. New equipment means records, maintenance schedules, maybe a technician who didn't like overtime and remembered odd calls. Across the drive, the river sulked. On my side, a cop car was parked half on the curb, half in the street, because they like to straddle legal and illegal positions both literally and professionally. A uniform was leaning on the hood nursing coffee like it was a grievance. I walked over with my hands visible and my expression relaxed in the way that makes policemen suspicious. "Morning," I said. "It's afternoon," he said without looking. "Yeah, I've been hearing that. You boys still guarding the ghost?" He finally turned his head. He was young, with that city cop polish that hasn't been scuffed by too many court dismissals. His nameplate said, Estrada. "You press." "Not unless you mean my suit." I handed him my card. "Archie Goodwin, working for Nero Wolfe." That got me a second look. Even in the precincts that pretend not to care about private detectives, Wolfe's name is a free upgrade to attention. Estrada read the card, then glanced toward the lamp. "Case is homicides now," he said. "We're just holding off the gawkers." "Lucky me," I said. "I'm a professional gawker. What time did your boys get the call?" He did a small shrug that meant he didn't love answering, but he'd do it if I kept my voice easy. 9:47 last night. 911 call. Woman walking her dog. She said the lamp went out for a beat, and when it came back on, there was a guy down and another guy standing there yelling for help. The other guy being Julian Harrow. "Yeah, blood all over him, knife on the ground." Looked pretty clean to us. "Clean as in obvious?" I asked. "Clean as in open and shut." Harrow said he and Vane argued. Vane swung first. Harrow pulled a knife, then didn't remember much after that. He was crying. Either he's guilty or he should be on Broadway. "Did he say anything about the lamp?" Estrada frowned. "Lamp? No." "Why?" "Just curious. Any witnesses besides the dog?" Couple people heard voices. Nobody saw the stabbing. Lamp was off maybe, I don't know, 2 seconds. One witness said 10. You know how that goes. 2 seconds is a blink. 10 seconds is a deliberate blackout. The difference is where murders live. "Did anyone check the lamp right after?" I asked. "City Tech came. Said probably a power hiccup. It hasn't done it since." "Which tech?" He lifted his coffee and squinted at me like I was trying to borrow his toothbrush. "You want their names? Call municipal." "I will," I said. "Anything else odd?" "No fight marks, no broken glasses, no second set of footprints doing a tap dance away from the body?" Estrada said. "You think there was another guy?" "I think my boss doesn't indulge coincidence. Lamps don't hiccup at the most dramatic moment unless the universe is running on cheap theatrics." He looked back at the lamp, and for a second I could see the idea worming its way under his cap. Then the training snapped back on. "Look," he said, "homicide's handling it. If Wolfe wants in, he can talk to Inspector... Nah." He scrolled through memory. Pearlie's lead. Pearlie. I filed that too, noting the spelling for later. "Thanks, officer. If the lamp starts blinking Morse code, I'll let you know." He snorted, half amused, half annoyed, and turned away. That was about as warm as you get from a uniform who doesn't know yet whether you're a help or a headache. I went back under the street lamp and looked around for any leftover sign the night had left. The pavement was scrubbed by rain and city pride. Still, You can read a place if you ask the right questions. I walked the radius of half a block. Slow. There was a bench a few yards off, wet with drizzle. A trash can with a liner that had been changed this morning, meaning the old one was in some sanitation truck compacted with the answers to a lot of things. Across the drive, a service box was mounted low on the pole, locked tight, the kind nobody touches casually. I crouched, pretending to tie a shoelace, and studied the box. Fresh scuffs on the paint near the lock. Not big gouges, but the faint kind you get when someone's in a hurry with a key or a tool. The lock itself was clean, but there was a thin line of brighter metal at the latch, like it had been recently worked. Somebody had opened it. Recently. I straightened and took a long look up at the lamp again. If it was rigged, the rigging was down below. If it was a signal, it was for someone watching from somewhere with a view. Riverside apartments rose behind me in tidy ranks, like people who'd never been punched. Any one of those windows could have held a pair of eyes last night. A woman walked by with a terrier and a hood pulled low. She glanced at me, then at the pole, then kept going faster. New York has a rule. Don't linger where trouble happened unless you're paid or perverse. I wasn't paid enough yet to be perverse. So I pulled out my notebook and wrote down the tag number, the sticker date, the scuffs, and the name Pearlie. And then I headed for a payphone that still existed on the corner like a museum exhibit with a dial tone. I called municipal maintenance and got the usual ballet of transfers, indignities, and recorded assurances that my call was very important to a city that had already forgotten me. Finally, a human voice with a Bronx accent that could peel paint. "Street Lighting Division," she said. "Hi," I said. "I'm trying to find out who serviced lamppost 180732 on Riverside near 94th in the last 48 hours. Who's asking?" "Archie Goodwin. I'm with Nero Wolfe." A pause, the kind that meant the name had traveled even to the fluorescent back rooms. "Hold." I held. When she came back, her voice had shifted half an inch toward caution. "Technician on that route is Leo Branner. He did a routine check yesterday afternoon. No trouble logged. You want him? He's at the West Side Depot." "Thanks," I said. "Any special calls last night? After the incident?" Another pause. "Not officially. But if there was a homicide, homicide's got the paperwork." "Right." I hung up, thinking about scuffed paint and a lock that had seen action outside the logbook. Leo Branner was my next stop, and if he hadn't opened that box, I wanted to know who had. In Wolfe's world, the first lie is never the last. In mine, it usually rides the subway. The West Side Depot was a low brick lump wedged between a bus garage and a place that sold used office furniture with the optimism of a pawn shop. The city keeps its vital organs in buildings that look like they'd collapse if someone sneezed too hard. Inside, the air was hot with radiator breath and the faint tang of metal filings. A line of men in reflective jackets stood by a counter that had seen more elbows than a prize fighter. I flashed a smile at the clerk, middle-aged, square-shouldered, and bored in a way that could qualify as a civil service exam, and asked for Leo Branner. He thumbed a clipboard without hurry. "Branner's on break," he said. "You got business?" "Depends how he feels about talking," I said. "It's about a lamp on Riverside." That lit up about as much as a spent match. "You one of the cops?" "No, private. I'm with Nero Wolfe." The name hopped the counter even if nothing else did. He made a little noise in his throat, then jerked his chin toward a side door. "Break room, back there." The break room was a fluorescent cave with a torn sofa and a coffee maker that had probably been condemned in 3 different departments. 2 guys were at a table playing cards without enthusiasm. The third sat by the window with a sandwich in one hand and a tabloid in the other. He was a big fellow with a face like a shovel. Broad, blunt, and a little nicked at the edges. City jacket over a hoodie. Boots with dried mud on them. He looked up when I came in, eyes wary. "Leo Branner?" I asked. "Yeah." I pulled out my card. "Archie Goodwin." He read it slowly, then looked at me again. "You a reporter?" "Nope." I ask fewer dumb questions. The corner of his mouth twitched, maybe a smile, maybe a tick. "Then why are you here?" "Because a lamp you serviced yesterday flickered at 9:47 last night, right when a man got stabbed under it." That took the tabloid right out of his head. He set it down and chewed once, hard. "I heard about that." "Then maybe you've heard nobody believes the lamp just had a mood swing." He leaned back, sandwich forgotten. "Look, I did my check around 2 yesterday. Everything normal. Panel read steady, breaker dry, photo eye fine. I logged it, went on." "Did you open the service box?" I asked. "Yeah, that's what a check is." "Anything odd about the lock or the latch?" He frowned as if pulling the afternoon back into view. "No, a little stiff maybe. It's an old lock." "After the homicide, was anyone from your division called out?" He shook his head. "Not me. That's a different crew if it's after hours." "But you could have gone anyway," I said. "Curiosity, over time, whatever." His eyes narrowed. "You saying I went there last night?" "I'm saying the box looked like it was opened recently, and Municipal says no after-hours call was logged. So either the box opened itself, or somebody did it without telling the city." He stared at me for a second, then took a bite of his sandwich. Chewed. Swallowed. That was a man buying time. "Maybe the cops opened it," he said. "They didn't." I asked. "They think it's a power hiccup." He blew out a breath. "Then I don't know. I didn't go back." "Leo," I said, keeping my voice friendly but not soft. "This isn't about sticking a technician on the hook. I don't care who opened a box unless it helps me find who killed a man. If somebody messed with that lamp, they timed a blackout. That's not a joke." His gaze slid toward the card players, then back. "You want my opinion?" "I want everything you've got." He lowered his voice half a notch. "Okay. Here's the thing. That pole's been a problem before. Not official problems. No outages. But we've had complaints about flicker. Not last week, months ago. Some resident kept calling it in, saying it blinked at night right after 9. We checked, found nothing. Could be the photo eye getting shadowed by a tree limb, could be a loose neutral. But it was a pattern, not a random hiccup. Right after 9. That was close enough to 9:47 to make my ears perk. "Which resident?" I asked. "Don't know. Calls came through 311. They don't tell us names unless it's a work order. It never got to that point." "Any chance you could find the records?" He shrugged. "You can try, administration, but they guard those like nuclear codes." I nodded, then watched his hands. They were square and clean with a faint grease line under the nails. No tremor, no guilty slickness. If Leo Branner was lying, he'd missed his calling as a poker champion, and the 2 guys at the table would have noticed a while ago. "Something else?" I asked. He looked away. That's when a man is deciding whether to say the part that makes his life complicated. "There was a van," he said finally. "Last night around 10:30, after the news hit. I was driving home from my girlfriend's place. Don't look at me like that, I got a life. And I passed Riverside. I saw a white van parked right near 94th, hazard lights on, no city markings, looked like a contractor. You stop? Nah. Figured it was cops or a news crew. But the weird thing was 2 guys were at the pole. One of them had the box open. I could see it from my lane. They weren't wearing uniforms." My spine did a small, useful tighten. "Why didn't you report it?" He gave me a flat look. "Report to who? I'm lighting, not homicide. And if I call it in, I'm the guy who was lurking at a murder scene. You ever try explaining that to internal affairs?" "Fair point. The city does love to eat its own tail." Can you describe them? I asked. Not much. Dark coats, one shorter, one taller. Both wearing caps. I only saw their backs. Van had no logo I could spot. Plates may be Jersey, but I couldn't say. Did you see if the lamp flickered then? No, it was on. Steady. I thanked him and left him with his sandwich. Outside, the air seemed colder, and not because the radiator smell had faded. 2 unmarked men at the service box, 10:30, an hour after the ambulance and the patrol cars, an hour after someone already decided the case was clean. That meant either city contractors had very strange timing, or somebody wanted to erase the lamp's confession before anyone asked it questions. I got back to a phone and called the brownstone. "Wolfe," came his voice after one ring, like he'd been waiting for the wire to twitch. "Archie." "The lamp's got a history," I said. "Flicker complaints for months, always after 9. No work order logged. And last night around 10:30, a lighting tech saw 2 guys, no uniforms, at the pole with the service box open. White van, unmarked." There was a silence where I could picture Wolfe's eyes going still. "Interesting," he said. "That's his polite word for somebody's neck is showing. I'm going to try administration for old complaint logs. Then maybe canvass the buildings for anyone who saw that van." "Proceed," Wolfe said. "And Mr. Goodwin." "Yeah?" "Do not be seen too clearly. Whoever opened that box last night was not repairing a public utility. He was repairing a narrative." I smiled without humor. "I'll wear my invisible man suit." I hung up and looked north along the avenue, where the city kept on pretending lamps only flicker for weather and wiring. Somewhere in that stretch of windows, there was a person who knew exactly why the light went out for 2 seconds at 9:47. And now that I knew it wasn't a hiccup, I knew something else too. The street lamp wasn't the only thing that had been tampered with. Administration for street lighting was housed in a building that had all the charm of a filing cabinet left in the rain. I got there by subway, because even private. Detectives have budgets, and because I wasn't eager to ride a cab with my thoughts. The lobby was full of people who looked like they'd been waiting since LaGuardia was a pasture. A security guard waved a metal wand at me that had seen so many belts it probably dreamed of buckles. Upstairs, after 3 wrong hallways and 1 right one, I found an office labeled Service Requests Archive. The woman behind the counter had hair the color of fresh snow and the posture of someone who'd won every argument in her life by outlasting the other person. There was a computer in front of her with a sticky note that said, "Don't touch settings." That's what the city calls cybersecurity. I smiled. "Hi, I'm Archie Goodwin. I'm looking for old 311 complaints on a street lamp. Riverside Drive near 94th. Post number 180732. She didn't smile. She didn't frown either. Her face was the neutral territory where hope goes to die. "Requests are confidential," she said. "Even when they're about a lamp that helped somebody get murdered last night." That nudged her about half a hair toward interest. "You police?" "Private investigator, working for Nero Wolfe." There it was again. The tiny flinch that meant the name had a file somewhere in her head. She glanced at a calendar, then back at me. "We don't release call logs without a subpoena." "Absolutely," I said. "You're a pillar. I'm not asking you to release anything officially. I'm asking if you can tell me whether there were repeat complaints about flickering after 9, and if so, who the caller was. Because if a caller was setting a pattern, that caller may be involved in a homicide." She studied me. If she'd been a suspect, Wolfe would have sat up an inch. "You could be making that up." "You could be wearing sequins under your cardigan," I said. "But life's short. Let's skip to the part where we help the city avoid embarrassing itself." She stared at me long enough to make it clear she didn't like being talked to that way, then turned to the computer. Her fingers moved with the weary competence of a person who knows every button because she's pressed them all in despair. "I'm not giving you names," she said as she typed. If you ask again, I'll call security." "Wouldn't dream of it." She clicked a few more times, squinted at the screen, and made a little noise that wasn't friendly. "Well," she said, "there were calls. 4 of them, over the last 5 months. Notes say, intermittent flicker approx 9:05, 9:10 p.m. Worried about safety. That's all. Any work orders generated? No, they were closed as no issue observed." "Caller number?" I asked, just to see where her line really was. She didn't even look up. "No." "Okay. Anything unusual about the way they were logged? Same phone? Same wording?" She hesitated. "Wording similar. Like, very similar. Same phrasing each time. That happens." She said it like she wanted to believe it. "Sure it does," I said. "Does it happen when the same person keeps calling because they're scared? Or when the same person keeps calling because they're checking whether their toy still works?" Now she looked up, and in her eyes there was a flicker of something that wasn't on the city payroll. "That's speculation." "Professionally, yes." She pushed a printed sheet halfway across the counter, then snatched it back as if she'd touched a hot pan. "I didn't give you this," she said. "Of course not." It wasn't a name. It was a block identifier and a timestamp list. Enough to show the calls came within 10 minutes of each other on the same day of the month for 3 months straight. Pattern, not paranoia. I thanked her and walked out before she could remember she hated me. Outside, I let the cold air at my face and thought about that schedule. Someone had been testing the lamp the way you test a lock you plan to pick. Start slow. See what you can get away with. Make sure nobody fixes it. Then, when the big night comes, you count on the city's laziness to cover your trick. The trick itself was the key. If they could kill the light for 2 seconds right as a knife went in, they could do other things with 2 seconds of darkness. Move a body. Move a weapon. Put blood where it would tell the story you wanted. When you're staging a scene, you don't need an hour. You need a blink. I took the subway back uptown and walked the last blocks to Riverside. The drizzle had turned to a steady wet that made everything glossy and lousy. I stood across from the lamp and looked at the building fronts. On the east side were the apartments with the view. On the west side, parkland and the river. If you wanted to watch the spot, you'd do it from one of those windows. So I started at the closest door. The doorman was the kind that could sell you your own hat back if you weren't careful. I gave him my card, my name, and enough charm to make him decide I wasn't a threat to the marble. "I'm asking residents if they saw anything last night," I said, "especially around 10:30. A white van, 2 men by the pole." He gave me the city look, polite refusal with a smile glued on. Residents don't like being disturbed. "Neither does the dead man," I said easily. "Which apartments face the lamp?" He shrugged. "Most of the front stack." "Anyone call down about flickering before last night?" His face did something small and quick, like a curtain twitching. "Not that I recall." "Do you recall a woman walking her dog calling 911? "Yes. Ms. Lillian Hart, 12B, nice lady. Terrible dog." "May I speak with her?" He frowned, weighing his rules against the itch of curiosity I'd just scratched. Curiosity usually wins. "I'll buzz her," he said. While he dialed, I leaned on the arch-arm counter and watched the lobby mirror. The elevator doors reflected everything that came and went. At 9:50, a man in a dark coat stepped in from the rain, shook out an umbrella, and nodded at the doorman with the kind of familiarity that said he wasn't a stranger. He moved toward the elevator without looking my way. The doorman called after him. "Mr. Tapp, hold on a second, will you?" The man paused. Mr. Tapp. One of Clara Vane's names had just walked into my lap like it paid rent. He turned slightly, and I got a clear look at him. Mid-40s, lean, eyes sharp in a practiced way, hair combed like he'd never been late to an appointment. He glanced at me once, quick and appraising, then back at the doorman. "What is it?" he asked. "Just a second. Ms. Hart's on the line," the doorman said. Then to me, "She'll be down." Ezra Tapp waited by the elevator, not impatient, just contained. I could have walked up and introduced myself right there, but Wolfe's warning ticked in my head. Don't be seen too clearly. Besides, surprises are better when you can choose the lighting. So I nodded politely at Tapp like I was any other damp citizen and watched him ride up. When the elevator doors closed, I felt the case tighten another notch. The circle wasn't out in the abstract. It was living in a building that looked straight at the lamp, and one of its members had just shown me he had a key to the lobby. Ms. Lillian Hart came down fast for a woman who'd seen enough of the city to know you don't hurry for strangers unless you've been waiting to talk. She was in her late 60s, neat as a pin, raincoat belted so tight it might have been holding her together. The terrier at the end of her leash looked like it had never met a rule it didn't want to bite. She gave me a brisk once-over. "You're not police?" "No, ma'am. Archie Goodwin." "Private detective," she said at once, and I wondered whether that was from the card or from the way I stood. "About Danny Vane." "Daniel," I said. "Yes. We're trying to make sure the right man is charged." Her mouth thinned. "The boy they arrested didn't do it." "Why do you say that?" She snorted. "Because I've watched men argue. I've watched men fight. When a man stabs another in temper, he doesn't stand there afterward like a child who's dropped a plate. He runs or he rages. That one was standing in the pool of it like he'd stepped into a theater cue. That was observation, not rumor. I liked Mrs. Hart already. "Let's start from the top," I said. "You were walking the dog about 9:47. 9:35, she corrected. "I'm punctual. Hugo is not." She jerked the terrier's leash. Hugo bared teeth at the air. "We were on the west path, coming south, just opposite this building. I saw Mr. Vane under the lamp. He was alone. Then I saw another man come up from 95th fast. They talked. I couldn't hear words, but the posture was tense." "Did you recognize either of them?" "Mr. Vane, yes. He's been up in 14D a few times to see Miss Vane. As for the other, no. Dark coat, hat pulled low. Not tall, average. I don't have my glasses for dog walking. That's Hugo's privilege." "What happened next?" "They moved closer to the pole. The other man was gesturing, sharp, with one hand. Then the light went out." "How long?" She didn't flinch. 2 seconds. Maybe 3. I know because I said, "Oh." And in my head I counted. 1, 2. It came back on, and Mr. Vane was on the pavement. The other man was standing over him a few steps away. He was holding his arm out like he'd dropped something. Like a knife. Yes. He wasn't bent over the body. He wasn't looking around. He was staring at the lamp. That made my skin prickle, the way it does when a sentence gets a hook in it. "Staring at the lamp," I repeated. Like he was waiting for it to do something else. When it didn't, he looked surprised. Then he started shouting, "Help! Somebody call an ambulance!" I did. Hugo tried to eat his shoe. "Did you see anyone else nearby?" "A couple of figures farther north, near the benches. But they kept walking. New Yorkers are mercifully deaf." "What about later? Around 10:30. White van, 2 men at the pole." Her eyebrows rose. "No van. I was in my apartment by then, but I did hear a door slam downstairs around that time. I looked out my window. I saw headlights up by the curb, but I couldn't see the vehicle clearly. There were 2 men near the pole, yes. One crouched at the box. The other was looking up the drive as if watching for someone. They were there less than a minute." "You didn't call police?" She gave me a look that said I was adorable. After I'd just been on the phone with them, they had cars all over. I assumed it was city or homicide. "Do you remember anything about the men? Height, build?" both medium, one a shade taller, both in dark coats. The taller one had a stiff way of standing, military maybe. The shorter one moved like a man who doesn't want his knees noticed. The terrier chose that moment to lunge at my trouser cuff. I stepped back and let Mrs. Hart haul him in. "Sorry," she said without sounding sorry. "He hates everyone equally." I'm honored. She looked up at me, and her briskness softened for a second. "Mr. Goodwin, Daniel was a good boy. He'd smile at Hugo even when Hugo was being Hugo. Please don't let them bury this in a convenient confession." I nodded. "That's why I'm here." We went back toward the desk. I asked if she'd ever noticed flickering before last night. "Hadn't you?" she said sharply. "Me?" She tilted her head. "You're the man who asked the doorman about it 3 weeks ago? Dark coat, hat, notebook." My heartbeat did a careful skip. "No, ma'am," I said, and kept my voice light. "That wasn't me." She frowned, searching my face for the lie and not finding it because it wasn't one. "Then it was someone else. He was standing right where you stood, looking up at the lamp and writing. I thought he was a reporter." "Huh. Do you remember him well enough to describe?" "Not really. Average height, hands in his pockets. He asked if anyone had complained about flickering at 9. I told him yes, I had. Twice. It made Hugo skittish. He said, 'Thank you,' and left. That fit the pattern from administration." The caller had a face now, not hers, but the man who had checked on her complaints. Someone had been monitoring the lamp's reputation. Someone who wasn't city. I thanked her again and got her number. As I was stepping out, I caught the doorman's eye. "You didn't mention a guy asking about Flicker 3 weeks back." He spread his hands, bland as plaster. "Lots of folks ask lots of things." "Sure," I said, "and some of them stab people." He didn't like that. His jaw tightened. I walked out into the wet and turned toward the river path. 2 men at the box after the murder. Another man scouting complaints before it. Ezra Tapp living with a view and a lobby key. The lamp wasn't just a tool, it was part of a plan that took months. I called Wolfe from the corner. "Archie," he said, as if he'd been listening to the drizzle. I talked to the 911 caller, Lillian Hart. She says the blackout was 2, maybe 3 seconds, not 10. She saw Harrow, or whoever it was, staring at the lamp right after it came back on, like he expected another flicker. At 10:30, she saw 2 men at the service box for under a minute. And 3 weeks ago, a man came by asking residents about flicker complaints at 9. She described him as average height, dark coat, hat, notebook. Not me. Wolfe was quiet a moment. So the lamp was tested, its reputation cultivated, and then used. Excellent. Also, Ezra Tapp lives in the building facing the lamp. I saw him go up while I was downstairs. "Ah," Wolfe said softly. The circle tightens. "Return when you have more. And Mr. Goodwin, avoid direct confrontation with Mr. Tapp until I decide the proper alignment of the pieces." I wasn't planning to wrestle him in the lobby. Yet. We hung up. I stood there a second, letting the wet air clear the office smell out of my head. Somewhere above me, in 12B or 14D or any of 100 windows, a pair of eyes might be watching the lamp and the path and me. I pulled my hat brim lower and started walking south. The next move was to find out why Ezra Tapp needed a front row seat to a flickering street lamp, and whether he was smart enough to know he'd just been placed on Nero Wolfe's board. I took the long way back toward the subway, partly because I like walking when I'm thinking, and partly because I didn't like the idea that somebody in one of those windows might be deciding whether I was worth following. The park path was slick and darkening early. The lamp behind me glowed steady now, innocent as a choir boy on Sunday, which is exactly how guilty objects like to look once the job is done. Near 92nd, I cut inland, crossed at Broadway, and ducked into a diner that had coffee strong enough to dissolve a spoon and waitresses who called you Horn without irony. I got a booth with a view of the street and ordered the coffee. Then I waited. When you want to talk to a man like Ezra Tapp, you don't knock on his door with a badge you don't have. You let him leave the building for whatever tidy errand he tells himself proves he's a decent citizen, and you meet him where he can't use a doorman as a shield. From what Clara Vane had said, Tapp was a consultant. Consultants are never off duty. They just change chairs. That meant he'd be going somewhere, sooner rather than later. He did. At 4:15, I saw him come down the block from the direction of Riverside, coat buttoned, hands in pockets, walking with that careful city purpose that says he'd rather be elsewhere but intends to control the route anyway. He crossed the street and headed south, glancing once at a storefront window as if checking his reflection for alibis. I paid the coffee, left a tip big enough to keep the waitress from remembering my face, and fell in behind him at the standard Goodwin distance, close enough to see his habits, far enough to pass as an accident. He went 2 blocks, turned into a polished glass building with a lobby full of tasteful potted plants and the kind of security that smiles while it measures your kidneys. The sign on the brass directory read, "Tapp Strategic Procurement, Suite 1108. If he'd wanted to be subtle, he picked a bad font. I didn't go in. Not yet. Instead, I stepped into a stationery store across the street, pretended to admire pens that cost more than my first bicycle, and watched the entrance through the display. 10 minutes later, a man in a grey suit entered behind him. Another 10 minutes, a woman in a camel coat. Clients, maybe. Or colleagues. Or accomplices. In circles like that, the categories tend to overlap. After half an hour, I decided I wasn't going to learn much by staring at a door. I went back outside and walked to the building's corner where a service alley ran along the side. There was a trash receptacle there, city standard green, with a lid that didn't quite close. It's amazing what respectability throws away. I lifted the lid and took a quick look. Mostly office junk. Coffee cups, shredded paper in neat bags. Then something that wasn't shredded. A crumpled sheaf of carbon copies, maybe tossed in a hurry before somebody remembered the rules. I'm not proud, but I'm efficient. I fished them out and stepped back into the alley to read. Invoices. Not for lamps, not for anything so municipal. Consulting services. Bid optimization. Site survey. After hours field adjustment. The client name on 2 of them was a shell company I'd never heard of, but the address line was a P.O. box in Jersey. The dates were what interested me. One was from 3 weeks ago. One from last night at 10:15, stamped emergency rate. The description on the 10:15 one was short. Electrical timing review, Riverside site. That wasn't proof. Not yet. But it was a clue with fresh blood on it. I folded the papers into my inside pocket and took the subway home with my ears tuned for footsteps that weren't there. Nobody followed me. If that was because I wasn't worth it, or because they were better at it than I am, I couldn't say. Either way, the brownstone door never looked so good. Fritz let me in with his usual dignified relief, like my return made the house more balanced. I hung up my coat and walked toward the office. The smell hit me in the hall. Not trouble, but dinner warming, veal maybe, and Wolfe's beer with its faint malt halo. The world was normal again, which is when it likes to spring surprises. Wolfe was in his chair, of course, and his face did not say he'd been springing anything. He looked at me, and I started opening my mouth. Before I could get a word out, he said, "Archie, someone has been in the kitchen." That stopped me mid-breath. "How do you know? You haven't been in the kitchen." "Fritz has," Wolfe said. "A jar of tarragon is not where it belongs." I blinked. "That's your subtle trespass. The sacred tarragon of West 35th? Wolfe's eyes were cold. "Do not be foolish. Fritz keeps his herbs in strict order." The jar was moved and replaced imperfectly. Nothing else disturbed. I felt the gears shift. A man tampering with a street lamp might also tamper with a kitchen, not for spices but for messages, or for a demonstration that he could get inside. Either way, it meant the circle was paying attention. "Any idea when?" I asked. "Within the last 2 hours. Fritz was in the kitchen at 3. Door left unlocked?" "Never." "Then whoever did it had a key," I said, and didn't like the taste of it. Wolfe regarded me. "Or skill?" I pulled the invoices from my pocket and handed them over. Speaking of skill, I went dumpster diving near Tapp's office. Found these. One's from 3 weeks ago, one from last night 10:15, marked emergency. Description says, electrical timing review, Riverside site. Wolfe read without haste. As his eyes moved, his face grew not more animated but more precise, as if a lens were tightening focus. "Excellent," he said at last. "Mr. Tapp may be less discreet than he imagines. Now, this kitchen intrusion suggests either intimidation or communication. Both are useful to me." "Useful how?" "Because it reveals anxiety. Our adversary fears the brownstone. That makes him clumsy. Or bold." "Boldness is only clumsiness in a better suit," Wolfe said, and set the papers down. "We will respond, but not impulsively. First, you will tell me every detail of your afternoon. Then we shall decide who next enters this house, and on what terms." I sat and I told him. About Mrs. Hart counting 2 seconds, about the men at 10:30, about the pre-scout asking questions, about seeing Tapp in the lobby, about the invoices. Wolfe listened the way he does, still as stone but with attention like a net. When I finished, he was silent a moment. "Archie," he said finally, "we have a murderer who uses seconds as weapons and access as a language. Tonight, we shall find out which of our suspects believes himself clever enough to speak that language to me. And if he comes back for paprika," Wolfe's mouth twitched, "then he will learn that a man who enters my house uninvited does not leave by the door of his choosing." I grinned because that's my reflex when danger squares its shoulders. But underneath, I felt the house tighten around us, like it knew the game had moved inside. By 7:30, the rain had quit pretending it was drizzle and settled into a steady performance, tapping the windows like a nervous informant. Fritz had served dinner with his usual air of a man who could feed a city into peace, and Wolfe had eaten with the solemn concentration he gives to the serious arts. If the tarragon jar had been moved to rattle us, it didn't show on him. On me it showed in the way I kept hearing the kitchen door hinge in my head even when nobody touched it. At 8:30, Saul Panzer arrived, slick as a shadow with a fedora. He didn't come in through the front like a guest. He came in like he'd always been part of the house's bloodstream. "Evening, Archie." "Evening, Mr. Wolfe." "Saul." Wolfe didn't waste ceremony. "You will help Mr. Goodwin keep our visitors honest tonight." Saul's eyebrows went up, but he didn't ask why. That's why Wolfe pays him. At 9, I rang Clara Vane and told her to come. I could hear the tension in her answer, like a violin string already pulled tight. She arrived within 20 minutes, pale but straight-backed, and I put her in the office with Wolfe. Then I started making calls. Victor Ralling's secretary tried to tell me he was unavailable, but the Wolfe name loosens more doors than a fire code. Marina Holt said she was at a charity gala and didn't see how that could possibly be relevant. I told her Mr. Wolfe had some information about Daniel Vane's death that might affect how she looked in tomorrow's papers. She was in a cab before I could blink. Simon Frobisher, the editor, gave me a chilly laugh and said he'd already spoken to the police. I said I couldn't do anything about that, but Wolfe could. He came sounding irritated, which is a reliable way to tell a man he's scared. Ezra Tapp I didn't call. I didn't have to. At 9:45, while I was still talking, to Frobisher, the doorbell went, and Fritz, who doesn't hurry unless Wolfe tells him to, announced from the hall, "Mr. Tapp is here." Wolfe didn't look at me, but I felt the satisfaction in the air shift like a heavy piece of furniture being placed exactly where he wanted it. "Show him in." Tapp entered with a pleasant face that had never had to explain itself to a judge. Dark suit, soft tie, the kind of man who smells faintly of expensive soap and cheaper confidence. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, "I wasn't aware you wished to see me." "I did not wish," Wolfe said. "I required." Tapp smiled at that as if it were a quirk. He saw Clara, nodded politely, and then saw Saul in the corner with his hat in his hands and his eyes in their sockets. Something flickered in Tapp's expression, recognition maybe, or calculation, but it vanished quickly. Wolfe folded his hands on his stomach. "Please sit." He meant the red chair against the wall, not the one near his desk, and Tapp sat there without protest, legs crossed in a way that tried to own the room. It didn't work. By 10:30, the full set was assembled. Ralling came in first, heavy-jawed and official, wearing that grey overcoat that makes city men look like they were born with a regulation stamp. Marina Holt swept in next, rain glittering on her hair, eyes bright and hard like she'd cut them herself. Frobisher arrived last, damp and annoyed, with a scarf knotted just so, and a mouth that could edit you into a comma if you stood still. Wolfe let them settle into the chairs I'd arranged. Clara sat near my desk, hands clasped tight around her handbag. Saul stood behind me, quiet as a second conscience. Wolfe waited until the last coat button was undone. Then he spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, you are here because Daniel Vane is dead and Julian Harrow is in custody for his murder. I have reason to believe Mr. Harrow is not the murderer." He lifted a hand to forestall protest. "If you are innocent, you have nothing to fear from my belief. If you are not, you have much to fear from my attention." Ralling stiffened. "This is outrageous. We've cooperated with the authorities. If you have something to say it to Inspector Purley." "I will say it to whom I choose," Wolfe replied. "Archie?" I stood and laid the crumpled invoices on Wolfe's desk where everyone could see them. "Found these in a trash can outside Tapp Strategic Procurement. One is dated 3 weeks ago. One is from last night, 10:15 p.m. The emergency rate. Service described as electrical timing review, Riverside site." Marina Holt's eyes went to Tapp like knives finding a seam. Frobisher blinked fast. Ralling's face didn't move, but his throat swallowed once. Tapp kept his posture, but his smile turned thin. "That's theft, Mr. Goodwin, and misunderstanding. I advise contractors on municipal compliance. Riverside site could mean any job on Riverside." "Sure," I said, "and emergency electrical timing at 10:15 on the night of a murder is just you being civic-minded." Wolfe took over. "Mr. Tapp, you have been involved in manipulating municipal bids. Mr. Vane discovered this and threatened to publish it. Your associates, Mr. Ralling, Miss Holt, and Mr. Frobisher, were at risk. You decided the most convenient remedy was to remove Mr. Vane." Ralling surged forward. "That is slander." Wolfe didn't look at him. "Sit, sir." Ralling sat, because Wolfe said it like gravity. Wolfe went on, voice calm as a scalpel. The difficulty was to kill him in a manner that would produce a ready culprit. Mr. Harrow served nicely, passionate, known to argue with Mr. Vane, and present by design. Clara's head lifted sharply. "By design?" Wolfe inclined his head toward her. "Your brother's note warned you to trust no one in the circle. He understood that his friend Julian was being maneuvered. The circle required not only murder, but theater." Frobisher snapped. "You have no proof of any of this." Wolfe looked at him as if at a smudge. "Proof lies in mechanics, Mr. Frobisher. A street lamp flickered precisely at the moment of death. For months beforehand, complaints were logged about flicker at just after 9, always worded similarly. This cultivated a history, so that when the lamp failed for 2 seconds during the murder, the police would accept it as a hiccup, not a device." He turned slightly. "Moreover, 2 men were observed at the service box at 10:30 last night after the homicide scene was cleared, and a contemporaneous invoice from Mr. Tapp's office lists emergency electrical review of that very site. Tapp said evenly, "You're weaving coincidences." "I do not indulge coincidence," Wolfe said. I saw Marina Holt shift, tension in her shoulders. She'd been listening like a woman at a poker table who suddenly realizes her partner might be holding the marked deck. Wolfe's eyes moved to Rowling. "Mr. Deputy Commissioner, you controlled access to lighting maintenance records. You ensured no work order was generated despite repeated complaints. You allowed Mr. Tapp to test an override device on that lamp without scrutiny." Rowling's cheeks went red. "Absolute nonsense." Wolfe's voice stayed mild. "What was the device, Mr. Tapp?" "A wireless relay in the service box. A timed override spliced to the photo eye. The lock shows fresh scoring. The box was opened without city log. Your emergency visit last night was to remove it. You thought you had done so undetected." Tapp's gaze slid for a fraction of a second toward the hallway door, then back. Not flight. Inventory. He was counting exits. Wolfe followed him without moving. It was arranged that Mr. Harrow would meet Daniel Vane under the lamp. Perhaps by a phone call from Mr. Frobisher, his editor, urging him to speak there for privacy. Or by another lure. Mr. Harrow arrived. Mr. Vane arrived. Your man, likely you, Mr. Tapp, approached. You confronted Vane. When you struck, the lamp was cut for 2 seconds. In that darkness, you used Mr. Harrow's own knife. Clara gasped softly. Tapp's voice sharpened. "That's ridiculous. How would I get his knife?" "By entering this house this afternoon," Wolfe said. Everybody froze. Even Fritz in the doorway holding a tray he didn't need to hold anymore. Wolfe gestured a thick finger toward me. "Archie, the tarragon." I went to the kitchen, to the herb shelf Fritz guards like a chapel, and took down the tarragon jar. It felt heavier than dried leaves should. I brought it back and set it on Wolfe's desk. Wolfe nodded once. I unscrewed the lid. Nestled among the tarragon was a slim black plastic case. Not big enough for a bomb, but big enough for trouble. I opened it. Inside was a small remote fob. Cheap, 2 buttons. The kind used for garage doors or wireless relays. Marina Holt let out a sound like a laugh, turning into a choke. Rowling stared as if the jar had grown teeth. Frobisher went white. Tapp didn't move at first. Then he said quietly, "You can't prove that's mine. Mrs. Hart saw a man 3 weeks ago asking about flicker complaints," I said. "Dark coat, hat, notebook. Not me. Not a city tech. It fits you." I held up the fob. "And the service box was opened last night at 10:30 to remove the relay you used. Except you missed the remote. You hid it here while you were in the brownstone today, either to retrieve later or to frame someone else. You chose the kitchen because you believed it beneath Wolfe's notice." Wolfe's eyes were almost gentle. "Nothing in this house is beneath my notice." Tapp's jaw worked. His calm cracked. "You don't understand the stakes," he said sharply. "Vane was going to ruin people. The city depends on stability. Contracts don't run on purity." "On theft, then? On intimidation?" Wolfe said. "On murder staged with a street lamp." "Don't make it sound romantic," Tapp snapped, and that was the line that gave him away. Because guilty men complain about style when they can't deny substance. Saul stepped forward just an inch, not threatening, just present. Wolfe reached for the phone. "Archie, call Inspector Purley." I did. Purley answered with the weary irritation of a man who'd had his case labeled clean too early. "Inspector," I said, "we have evidence at the brownstone linking Ezra Tapp to manipulation of the Riverside street lamp blackout and to the murder of Daniel Vane. Mr. Wolfe requests your presence immediately." There was a pause that said Purley had considered hanging up and then remembered he'd be sorry. "I'm on my way." I hung up. Tapp looked around the room, and I could see the escape plan die in his eyes. Rowling wouldn't help him. Holt wouldn't. Frobisher couldn't. and Saul was a quiet wall between him and my door. Wolfe spoke softly now, as if to a student who had failed an exam. You are clever, Mr. Tapp, but cleverness without restraint is merely a sharper form of stupidity. You built a pattern to excuse a 2-second darkness. Yet 2 seconds is precisely long enough for a mind to notice intended artifice. Your victim understood it. So did his sister. So did I. Clara's voice trembled but held. Why Julian? Why drag him into it? Tapp looked at her. Something like regret flickering and then hardening into self-defense. Because Daniel trusted him. Because the story needed a face. Because you'd fight harder to save him and go nowhere else. You underestimated her, Wolfe said. Inspector Purley arrived at 11:20 with 2 uniformed men behind him. When he saw the fob, the invoices, and Tapp's face, his irritation turned to a kind of resigned comprehension. I gave him a brief, tight account. Wolfe filled the spaces with his clean logic. Purley listened, then nodded once. Mr. Tapp, he said, you're under arrest. Tapp didn't resist. That would have been melodrama, and he was past the point of believing in it. He only said as they let him out, You'll never prove the circle. Wolfe regarded his retreating back. Oh, but you already have. After they were gone, the office sagged the way a room does when the fight leaves it. Marina Holt got up first, eyes blazing. I want it on record, she said, that I was never part of any murder. Then you will give Inspector Purley every record of your dealings with Mr. Tapp, Wolfe said. If you are innocent, facts will help you. If you are not, they will help the city. She stared at him, calculating, then stalked out without another word. Ralling followed, stiff and pale, muttering about lawyers. Frobisher lingered a moment, looking at Clara as if he wanted to say something that might save him. Nothing came. He left. Clara sat very still. The tremor had returned to her hands, but now it was the tremor of a door finally unlocked. Julian, she whispered. Purley will move quickly, Wolfe said. Mr. Harrow will be released tonight, barring bureaucratic sloth. She closed her eyes. A tear slipped down, not dramatic, just exhausted. I handed her a handkerchief. She took it like a lifeline. I don't know how to thank you, she said. By living well, Wolfe replied, and by choosing your friends carefully. She looked at him, understanding the weight of that now. She rose, steadier. Good night, Mr. Wolfe. Archie. After she left, the brownstone was itself again, but not quite. It never is right after trouble. There's a faint echo in the corners that takes a while to fade. Fritz appeared with a tray. Coffee, please. Wolfe nodded, then watched Fritz go like a man watching the last candle in a chapel. When Fritz was gone, Wolfe turned to me. Archie, you are aware that morality is not a luxury. I've met it in diners, I said. It doesn't tip well. Wolfe ignored that. Men like Tapp justify corrosion as pragmatism. They claim the city cannot function without their rot. Yet they forget one thing. What's that? That rot spreads. It never remains obedient. Today a bid is manipulated. Tomorrow a man is killed under a darkened lamp. Appetite, once indulged, discovers no natural limit. He lifted his beer. That is why I dislike corruption, not because I am idealistic, but because I am realistic. Fritz returned with coffee, and the smell of it was like a curtain falling on a stage. Wolfe took his cup. I took mine. Down on Riverside Drive, the street lamp would be shining steady tonight, innocent as ever. But for a couple of seconds last night it had been a conspirator, and a man had died in its blink. Wolfe had made the blink speak. That's what he does. He sits still and makes the world move around him until it has nowhere to hide. I took a sip of coffee and felt the house settle. Well, I said, next time somebody wants to use municipal lighting for a magic trick, I hope they pick a different magician. Wolfe's mouth curved, almost invisible. They may, but they will not pick a wiser one. Sure they won't, I said, and New York won't ever rain in November. We drank our coffee. The orchids upstairs waited for morning, and somewhere downtown, Julian Harrow was walking out of a cell into a city that had almost swallowed him, while the circle, whatever pieces of it were left, found out that 2 seconds of darkness don't beat a mind that refuses to blink